This is the Adidas Prime X3 Strung. It's got 2 layers of carbon, a super tall stack height of 50 millimeters of racing foam, and it has an upper created by a robot that carefully places each and every strand of high tensile fiber. But is this shoe a pinnacle of Adidas technology, or is it just a headline grabbing gimmick? It's time to lace up the Prime X3 Strung and take it for a run. Yo, what's going on? My name is Kafuzia and I'm an elite runner who reviews running shoes here on YouTube. And today I want to talk to you guys about the Adidas Prime X3 Strung. But before I give you my thoughts on this shoe, I do want to go over some disclosures. This is a pair of shoes that I bought with my own money. Nobody sent it to me. Nobody's paying me to make this video or to include their brand in this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my footage or my thoughts before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. So with that disclosure out of the way, let's talk about the Adidas Prime X3 Strung, and let's start with the specs. There's a lot going on in this shoe, and let's start with the stack height. There's 50 millimeters of stack height here in the heel with a 7 millimeter drop, giving us 43 millimeters of stack height in the forefoot. Now in this midsole, the foam that we're looking at here is Light Strike Pro, or at least nominally it's Light Strike Pro. Adidas currently has a lot of different kinds of foam formulations floating around in their Elite Race product that they're all calling Light Strike Pro, but here we kind of see it up close and personal, the 2 different types in action. We've got the yellow foam, or at least yellow in my shoe here, that serves as a top layer, the heel and the forefoot of the shoe, and then we also see in that white layer another foam also called Light Strike Pro that is at the forefoot, and that is like a huge chunk of cheese. Now the way that the carbon elements are arranged in this shoe, like a springboard that you see in gymnastics, and so you've got the 2 layers of carbon that meet up at the front and they create like a wedge that squeezes every time your foot lands on top of the carbon elements and the foams here. Now the top layer of carbon is a plate that is full length. It doesn't go all the way into the toes, and it certainly doesn't have like that carbon underbite that we saw in the Puma Fast R2 and Puma Fast R3, but it does have this little tail at the end, and I think what this is trying to do is increase the stability of the shoe all the way throughout, from the forefoot all the way to the way end in the heel of the shoe. And on the underside of the cheese, we see Adidas's Energy Rods 2.0. These are carbon infused rods that kind of mimic the placement of the bones of your foot and take on the shape of a carbon fiber plate. Now, the other thing that stands out to me when I'm looking at the Prime X3 is the hole that's behind the forefoot. Not only can you see through the shoe from the side, but you can also see through it from the bottom. And this is something that we started to see last year in the Prime X2 Strung, but you can see that there's a giant cavity here where you could see some of the carbon energy rods exposed through the bottom all the way up through the top plate. And when you look through here, you get another really nice view of those energy rods and the carbon plate up top. I think what they're trying to do is kind of hollow out the space in between the forefoot and the rear, almost disarticulating the two. Again, kind of like something that we saw in the Puma Fast R2 and Fast R3, but they're doing it in a way that there's still support for these energy rods. I think otherwise, if they took this connecting piece out, those energy rods would snap, but you have that here in order to not only support those rods and prevent them from breaking, but also to create a little bit more of a continuity in terms of foot strike when your foot hits the ground, if you're in the more of the mid-foot striker category. Now for grip on the bottom of the shoe, we do have some exposed foam, but we do see the Continental grip up front, and we got a combination of Continental rubber and a light traction up here on the outer edge of the toe. And so the idea is here to maximize the amount of grip and coverage that you're getting in the forefoot as you're pushing off of this very aggressive rocker. And then I guess that's the third thing that really stands out to me on this shoe, is that the rocker starts late, much later than say in the Adios Pro Evo 1 or Evo 2. And it reminds me more of the Adios Pro series of shoes where the rocker starts late but then shoots up very quick. So there's an aggressive taper of that shoe as you get from kind of the pads of your feet to the toes. Now up top, we see Adidas Strung material. This is something that they use in only a handful of their shoes. It's something that I've seen the robots and machines that make this material. They never let us film any of the machines. And I will note that the machines that I saw making kind of the sheets of strung that are used to make the uppers for this shoe are very different than the machines that I've seen in some other pictures that have been published online. But the machines work with extreme amount of precision, and every single strand here is deliberately placed, and then they're layered on top of each other in terms of areas where they want less flexibility and more strength, and then they're also arranged strategically so that way in areas where you do want some stretch, you're going to be able to have a little bit more flexibility. Now, to give even more flexibility, in the tongue, we have a knit material that's up here, so make it easier for your foot to slide in, and that also lines the top of this heel collar over here. There are a couple of bumper pads on each side of the back of the heel to help with everything to fit together, but otherwise it's a pretty floppy shoe back here, or at least as floppy as Strung will allow an upper to be. Altogether, there is a lot of stuff in here, so it is a heavy shoe, but it does come in a lot lighter than last year, and overall it feels, relatively speaking, like a light shoe. This shoe came in at a measured weight on my scale here from my reference US men's size 9 of 10.1 ounces or 286 grams, or just about the same weight as a Vomero Plus. Now that we talked about what the shoe is like on paper, let's talk about what it's like on the road. The Adidas Prime X3 Strung is a very fun shoe to run in, and I'm enjoying the changes and updates they made, especially compared to last year's Prime X2 Strung. Now, while I've enjoyed every edition of the Prime X since its inception, I feel like sometimes it teeters back and forth between, do I want to make this like a really wild, chaotic, crazy shoe? Or do we want to make this a little bit more safe of a shoe that we could sell to a wider range of people? And this year, the pendulum swings pleasantly to the side of it being pushed a little bit more to the outer boundaries of what is a runnable shoe. And I think that the shoe just is a lot more fun and exciting in that way. I feel like the springboard effect of the Light Strike Pro and the double layer of carbon here is really nice and noticeable, especially when you can get on your toes when I'm landing kind of in the way that I want my foot to land when I'm trying to pick up the pace a little bit, like running, let's say, marathon effort miles. Everything is working together nicely to give me a nice compression and then a very strong sense of decompression and pop as I'm pushing off into the next stride. The Light Strike Pro that's in this shoe isn't like the squishy of material. So if you're thinking it's going to be like recovery sandal soft, or it's going to be super airy and you're going to just compress and smush everything and then have it really snap back quickly, that's not exactly what I'm feeling. There's a bit more responsiveness to this foam, and a lot of times I kind of use the word firm and responsive in the same ways, and I'll use them almost interchangeably, but that's not really what's happening here. So there is a softness to this shoe, but it is not a like pillowy softness. It's more like it's absorbing impact really well in a way that is a little bit more dense than some of the airier foams that are out on the market today. So for those of you who are worried about blasting through even a very tall stack height of shoe, this is a shoe that you're going to be able to hit the ground, have it absorb your impact force as well, and then have it pop back up in a really pleasant and bouncy way. So I do feel a lot of bounce every time I'm pushing off with the Prime X3 Strung. As far as fit goes, I went with my usual running shoe size, and that worked out really well for me. The intended fit of the shoe is to be a little bit more race oriented, but it doesn't feel like it's super snug or crunching in on any of my toes. I feel like they have plenty of room for a shoe that I'm intending to use for longer periods of time. The amount of padding in the heel to me seems to be just right. I didn't experience any heel slippage in this shoe, but I also haven't experienced any heel slippage in the strong versions of the Prime X in the past either. The traction on this shoe is great. I've never had a problem with any of Adidas's race shoes in terms of how they're implementing either Continental rubber or the light traction in their race product. I feel like they've done a really good job balancing the need for protecting the foams, providing grip, and also keeping everything lightweight. I do appreciate that they've hollowed out this shoe and removed some of the foam that's in here. They didn't do a cutout on the medial side or on the kind of arch side of the shoe like they've done in previous years to help make the shoe bend a little bit easier. But I think by removing a lot of this foam and by providing that really aggressive rocker up front, that kind of serves the same purpose where it's easy to kind of get the shoe up on the toes and get over the kind of big bulb of foam you have towards the pads of your foot in order to make sure that it rolls smoothly and you're able to push off without having to fight the shoe too much. And by hollowing out kind of the middle portion of this shoe here, you're able to maintain this kind of medial wall, so it's a little bit more stable than it might otherwise be had they decided to go with a cutout instead. Now, I'm not saying that this is a stable shoe. I feel like the Prime X2 Strung was probably the most stable of the Prime X series, but I'm not looking for the Prime X to be a safe shoe. I'm looking for it to be a lot more exciting, a little bit dangerous, if you will. And so I really like the way that they've taken kind of some of the learnings from the past few generations and put it into this shoe in a way that feels like it's still pushing boundaries, but also still feels like a shoe that I'm actually supposed to run in and it's not some sort of like collector's item or museum piece. Also, because a lot of my long runs have a mix of marathon effort miles and then easy miles, the way that this shoe is set up, it behaves better for me at some of those easier paces or non-race paces. So it feels like a shoe that is a little bit better suited for long runs than, say, just using your marathon or racing shoes would be, because those shoes generally aren't great for, say, like warm-up or even recovery miles or recovery Ks in the middle of your long run workout. So the Prime X3 Strung for me is a shoe that is a lot of fun, a little bit dangerous, but also very useful as part of my rotation. Now, before we wrap up this video, I think it'd be helpful to kind of go over a brief history of the Prime X, because even though this is Prime X3 Strung, this is actually the fourth Prime X that Adidas has introduced. And so this is a series of shoe that I've kind of really fallen in love with ever since it started, and it has a weird special place in my heart just because it's so peculiar. Let's go over it from the beginning. The first Prime X was just called Prime X. It was a 50mm stack height shoe. They were all 50mm stack height shoes from the beginning until now, and they were marked on the side of it in terms of how big it was. Now, this first one had a 10mm drop and a very subtle rocker up at the front. And so all the effort to wrangle this foam happened because of the way that the foam was already naturally slanted from the back to the front. Now, some of the other features of this shoe were that it did have double layers of carbon, but it was actually 3 pieces of carbon elements. So it did have energy rods underneath the forefoot, but it also had these, if you look here, there's holes in the bottom. They had these 3 carbon blades that were like 3 blades that sat underneath the wedge of foam in the middle of this shoe. And then in the back of this shoe, you can't see it, but there is a half carbon plate. So there's half energy rods in the front and then a half carbon plate in the back. And I'm thinking the reason why they did that, and the reason why we see an extension of that carbon fiber plate out the back end of this shoe in the Prime X3 Strung, is because of the fact that otherwise this shoe was really unstable. And the reason why it was unstable, I mean, for me it was fine, but I could see why other people thought it was unstable, is twofold. One is that it had a medial cutout. So they got rid of a lot of foam right underneath the arch of the shoe. They wanted it to make it look more kind of foot shaped, but also by doing that, it makes it easier to kind of bend the shoe and kind of load the carbon, get it bent in a situation where there's then potential energy as it snaps back to give you a little bit more from the foam. But that also carved out a lot of foam that people might otherwise be landing on as their foot is hitting the ground. And combining that with the fact that they just took the kind of regular racing upper from the Adidas Pro that year and just slapped it on top of the Prime X. And they did an additional thing because the shoe was kind of big and heavy. They even like carved out some pieces of the tongue. So the tongue didn't even completely cover the top of your shoe. And when your foot is in it, you could see your sock poking out in the top of the shoe here. So it was kind of unusual, but this was also my favorite of all the Prime X's. I mean, I'm sometimes a big fan of novelty and recency. Sometimes I'm a big fan of primacy, and I guess maybe primacy is it with this one, because this shoe was just so different than everything else that is out there on the market. I talk about the original Prime X in the way that a lot of the people who have been running and reviewing shoes longer than me, somehow those people talk about the original Hoka Clifton. That's how I think about the original Prime X. It just has a special place, not just because it was a good shoe, but because it was such a good shoe and so different than everything else that was on the market. People looked at this and kind of laughed at it, and I was like, no, this shoe is it. This shoe was just a lot of fun, but I felt like a lot of people complained about how unstable it was, and so there was a quick change to give us the Prime X Strung. Now, they didn't call this Prime X2 with Strung, which is what I kind of thought the name of this should be, but they just called it Prime X, I guess, in parentheses 1. Strung. So this is the first time we saw the strung upper, and we kind of saw like the race intentions of the shoe if we look at the insole of it, where they had like a little space where you could write your race times in it. And this is a shoe that I raced Boston Marathon in, and I had a lot of fun in it. It still retained a lot of the same features, the 3 carbon sling blades, the half carbon rods up front, and then the half carbon plate in the back, and the medial side cutout. But they changed the heel drop on this shoe for some reason, and they put in a little bit more of a late and abrupt rocker, but for me, it wasn't quite enough. And so I had a little bit of a harder time wrangling a lot of this foam, or at least after I got through Heartbreak Hill in Boston, afterwards I felt like I had nothing left, which may not be, and probably isn't, the fault of this shoe, but I really just felt like I had nothing left and I couldn't get over the shoe, and I had a hard time kind of like transitioning from the back of the shoe into the good stuff up at the front. And so that's kind of where I felt like this shoe, trading rocker for heel drop, made a choice that for me wasn't quite as exciting as the Prime X original, although I do feel like a lot of people were able to run more comfortably in the strung version. Then the following year, we had Prime X2 Strung, and it kind of took the changes in the Prime X Strung and went even further. We lost the medial cutout altogether, and instead we had a wider base in the forefoot and an earlier rocker. And so one of the ways that they kind of fixed the problem of it, sometimes it gets hard to get over the top on this shoe, was to make it easier to get over the top. And they also started with the hollowing out of the middle in this shoe. You can kind of see across through this shoe in a very, very small way. And you can also see through these now double carbon plates. They went away with energy rods in Prime X2 Strung, and we have double layers of carbon plates. And we're seeing the start of that little wedge springboard design up in the toes. Now, I think as much as I enjoyed running the Prime X2 Strung, it got even heavier this year. And I felt like the changes they made were accommodating a lot of the people who didn't appreciate the first Prime X to begin with, and also complained about the instability. And so I felt like we traded the chaos, the fun of the Prime X, and we did add a little bit of stability. So we had a more safe, a more boring, and a much more stable shoe in Prime X2 Strung, although it was still 50 millimeters of stack height, lots of great Light Strike Pro. It was just kind of my least favorite of them all. And now I feel like the pendulum has swung all the way back with the Prime X3 Strung, which is, I think, now my most favorite of all of these shoes, having run in a lot of these just again recently, just to refresh my recollection on some of these shoes. The Prime X1 feels almost just like a tall shoe at this point. It feels like I don't know, if you want to go with the Max nomenclature that seems to be really popular in running these days. I feel like the original Prime X Strung to me feels like a Boston Max kind of at this point. Still really fun, a little bit unstable, but I still really like it, but it's not as wild as I remember it. The Prime X3 is wild like I remember the original Prime X, and that's what makes it so fun. It doesn't have the 10 millimeter drop that I liked from the original Prime X, but it has 7 millimeters, which isn't a small amount, and it has that rocker up front, so it makes it easy to wrangle the foam and get up on the toes. And even if you're on some easier miles and you're doing more mid-foot striking or even heel striking, there's still plenty for you to land on, so it's less stable than the stability Prime X, we'll call this one, but the Prime X3 is now my favorite of all 4 of these Prime X's. Now let's wrap up this video by going over the buying guide, and we'll also discuss some alternatives. The Adidas Prime X3 is a worthy successor to the unbridled chaos of the Prime X name, as I feel like this shoe is the wildest Prime X yet. If you're trying to win marathons or set area records, this shoe isn't for you. And if you're trying to run fast marathons, whatever fast might mean for you, I'm thinking that you'll probably want to race in something that's a little bit lighter. But for those of you who are looking for something a little bit different and something that's a lot of fun for long distance speed, the Prime X3 is a very fun choice. And also, I do think for some of my bigger, taller friends out there, those of you who are worried about blasting through regular carbon plated shoes, I feel like the Prime X3 is going to make for a very compelling race day option. This shoe retails for $300, and that's really expensive for a shoe, although I'm not sure that these days it's all that out of line for what you're getting in the shoe. It is a lot of money to pay for a shoe, so it's not a shoe that I'm going to be recommending for most runners out there. But if you are a running shoe enthusiast or you just like collecting shoes, I feel like this is a shoe that you definitely have to try. Now, let's take a look at some of the competition that's out there to see where this $300 stacks up. Now, I think the first shoe that comes to mind when we're talking about like rule breaking shoes and like not caring about how many layers of carbon plates or what they're doing to be over the top, I think the most over the top shoe that exists on the market right now is from Puma, and this is the Fast RB. RB stands for rule breaker. It has a carbon fiber plate that is full length, and then it has two plastic elements over pods of foam that are sandwiched in kind of that springboard configuration. A lot of the same concepts that are going on with the cheese in front of the Prime X3 Strung. But the really big difference on this shoe is that there is like no heel. I mean, there is a heel and there's some rubber back here, and you do kind of end up using it if you're running at easy paces. But this shoe kind of free floats on the forefoot. And I don't know if you guys remember jump soles, but it's kind of like a jump sole kind of feel to me. The upper has no laces at all, because why not? And the shoe comes in at a gigantic weight of over 12 ounces, at least as I measured my US men's size 9 on the scale. Now, this is another shoe that really isn't a shoe that I'm recommending for people to go try, but if you are wanting to experience what the brands are willing to put out there in terms of like concept shoes and what could we make if we didn't care about the rules at all, the Fast RB is another shoe you should be considering. But get your wallet ready. Even if you can find a pair right now, it retails at $350. Now, let's go the other way and go with a little bit more of a real world example in terms of a shoe that I think is worth comparing to the Prime X3 Strung, because I do think ultimately at the end of the day that the Prime X3 Strung is not a gimmick and it is a fun shoe to have in your rotation. And I think that another kind of less wild version of this comes from Brooks, and this is the Hyperion Max 3. This is a shoe that has been surprising me ever since I first put it on. This also uses a jumbo stack height, 2 kinds of foam and plates in it, although the 2 kinds of foam in this shoe are PIBA and then DNA Flash, which is a supercritical foam, and the plate that they're using is a plastic plate, but there's a lot of foam here. They're using a medial side cutout to help wrangle all this foam, and it has a rocker that shoots up really quick towards the toes. They have a knit tongue as well, some padding to make it comfy in the heel, and then a very strong but flexible upper. So there's like a lot of similarities going on in these two shoes. And so part of me is kind of like, this is the Hyperion Max, so is the Prime X3 like Mega Max? But I think that the better way to think of these two is that like this is kind of like the premium version and this is kind of like the knockdown version of that. I feel like you're getting a lot of similar experiences between these two shoes, but everything is kind of like tuned down just a little bit. This one's a little bit more stable. This one has a little bit less kind of like wildness to the bounce of it. It has less layers of carbon. It has a little bit less everything. And so I feel like they've taken the Prime X3 down a notch and you get the Hyperion Max 3. It is a little bit lighter of a shoe, comes in 0.2 ounces lighter, and it comes in substantially cheaper as that shoe retails for $200. So if you're looking at the Prime X3 and say, that's way too much for me, but I'm interested, I'd have you take a look at the Hyperion Max 3 instead. So those are my thoughts on the Prime X3 Strung. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about this shoe or any of the shoes that I talked about today, or better yet, stop by the live stream that I do over on the Kofuzi Run Club channel every Monday and Thursday. I'd love to answer any questions you have over there in the chat. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I will see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?